The dust cloud behind her was visible for miles, a telltale sign that someone was either running towards something or away from it. And in the case of the woman on the black mare, it was decidedly the latter, as she rode into Kearney, Nebraska on a scorching July afternoon in 1878. Beatrice Calloway had been riding for 3 days straight with minimal rest, her body aching from the constant movement and her mind fractured from exhaustion and fear. The small frontier town materialized like a mirage through the heat waves rising from the prairie, and she had never been more grateful to see civilization in her entire 22 years of existence. Her dark auburn hair, once pinned neatly beneath her hat, now hung in matted tangles down her back, and her riding dress was covered in so much trail dust that its original blue color was barely distinguishable. The mare beneath her was equally exhausted, foam flecking her neck and flanks heaving with each labored breath. She needed water, food, and a place to hide in that exact order. Her eyes scanned the main street as she guided her horse forward at a much slower pace now, taking in the storefronts, the saloon, the general store, and what appeared to be a small hotel. A few townsfolk stopped their afternoon activities to watch her pass, their expressions ranging from curious to wary. She knew how she must look, like trouble on horseback, and that was precisely what she was trying to escape. The livery stable stood at the far end of town, a weathered building with large open doors and the distinctive smell of hay and horses wafting from within. Beatrice aimed her mare toward it, her arms trembling with fatigue as she held the reins. As she approached, a tall figure emerged from the shadowy interior, and she found herself looking at a man who embodied everything she imagined a cowboy should be. Marcus Sullivan stood just over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty work shirt and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days working outdoors. His hair was the color of wheat in late summer, slightly too long and curling at the edges from beneath his worn Stetson. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking shade of blue-gray that seemed to assess everything in a single glance. He appeared to be around 26 or 27, with the kind of confident bearing that came from a man comfortable in his own skin and his place in the world. "Help you, miss?" His voice was deep and carried a hint of concern as he took in her disheveled appearance and her horse's condition. Beatrice opened her mouth to respond, but the words seemed stuck in her throat, tangled up with all the fear and exhaustion she had been pushing down for days. Instead, she found herself swaying in the saddle, the world tilting dangerously to one side. Marcus moved with surprising speed for a man of his size, reaching her just as she began to slide from the saddle. His strong arms caught her before she could hit the ground, and she found herself pressed against his solid chest, inhaling the scent of leather, hay, and honest sweat. It was oddly comforting after days of smelling nothing but her own fear and the prairie dust. "Easy now," he said softly, his voice rumbling in his chest. "I have got you. When was the last time you ate or drank anything?" "Yesterday morning," she managed to whisper, her voice hoarse and cracking. "Maybe, I cannot quite remember." Marcus cursed under his breath and carefully set her on her feet, keeping one arm around her waist to steady her. "Can you stand for a minute while I tend to your horse? She is about done in, and I need to get her cooled down and watered properly, or she will founder." Beatrice nodded, leaning heavily against the stable's wooden support post, while Marcus led her mare inside with gentle efficiency. She watched through half-closed eyes as he spoke softly to the animal, running his hands expertly over her legs and checking her hooves with the practiced ease of someone who genuinely cared about the welfare of horses. He loosened the saddle girth but did not remove the tack entirely, walking the mare in slow circles while she cooled down. "You ran this horse hard," he said without accusation, just stating a fact. "She is a good animal, tough. Most horses would have given out before this one did." "I know," Beatrice replied, guilt washing over her. "I had no choice. I will pay for her care. I have money." Marcus glanced at her sharply, his eyes taking in details she suspected most people would miss. "I do not doubt that. But what I am more interested in knowing is what you are running from that would make you near kill yourself and a fine horse to get away from." Beatrice stiffened, her hand instinctively moving to her saddlebag where she had hidden what little money and possessions she had managed to grab before fleeing. "That is my business, not yours." "Fair enough," Marcus said easily, but his expression remained serious. "But you should know that Kearney is a small town. Word travels fast, and if someone comes looking for you, people will remember seeing you ride and looking like death warmed over. Just want you to be prepared for that." The truth of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. Of course people would remember. She had probably created quite a spectacle, and in a town this size, that kind of thing would be the talk of every dinner table by sundown. After another 10 minutes of walking, Marcus deemed the mare cool enough to water. He led her to a trough and let her drink small amounts, controlling her intake so she would not make herself sick. Throughout the entire process, Beatrice watched him work, noting the competence and care in every movement. There was something inherently trustworthy about this man, though she had learned the hard way that her judgment of character was not always reliable. "What is your name?" she asked finally, needing to break the silence that had stretched between them. "Marcus Sullivan." "I own this livery, along with some land outside of town where I run cattle." "And you are—" She hesitated for just a fraction too long, and she saw his eyes narrow slightly. Lying seemed pointless at this stage. "Beatrice Calloway. Just Beatrice is fine." "Well, just Beatrice," Marcus said with the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Why do not we get your horse settled in a stall with some hay, and then I will take you to get some food? You look like a strong wind could blow you over, and I would hate to have that on my conscience." "You do not have to do that," Beatrice protested weakly, even as her stomach chose that exact moment to growl loudly enough for them both to hear. "I know I do not have to," Marcus replied, leading the mare into a spacious stall and finally removing her tack. "But I am going to anyway." Call it frontier hospitality or being a busybody, whichever makes you feel better about accepting help from a stranger. There was something about his straightforward manner that made Beatrice's defenses lower slightly. She was so tired of being on guard, of looking over her shoulder, of jumping at every unexpected sound. For just a little while, maybe she could let someone else take charge, someone who did not seem to want anything from her except to offer basic human kindness. "Thank you," she said quietly, meaning it more than he could possibly know. Marcus tipped his hat to her and then lifted her saddlebags from where he had set them on a bench. "These staying with you, or can they stay locked up here?" "With me," Beatrice said quickly, reaching for them. Everything she had left in the world was in those bags, including the evidence that could hang her if the wrong people found it. Marcus handed them over without comment, though she saw the questions in his eyes. "Let me just tell my stable hand he is in charge for a bit, and we can go. There is a boarding house run by Mrs. Henderson that serves decent food. Nothing fancy, but it will stick to your ribs." True to his word, Marcus quickly spoke with a teenage boy who was mucking out stalls in the back, and then they set off down Kearney's Main Street. The afternoon sun was still blazingly hot, making Beatrice grateful for the slight breeze that had picked up. People watched them walk together, and she could practically feel the speculation radiating from every storefront and window. "Do not mind them," Marcus said quietly, noticing her discomfort. This town does not get many newcomers, especially not beautiful women who ride in alone looking like they have been through hell. It will be the talk of the town for a few days, and then something else will happen and they will forget all about you. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks at his casual use of the word beautiful, but she did not comment on it. I hope you are right. Usually am, Marcus replied with that same hint of humor in his voice. Drives my sister crazy, but that is a story for another time. The boarding house was a 2-story white structure with a wide porch and flower pots that somehow managed to contain living plants despite the harsh prairie sun. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded Beatrice of her grandmother. Marcus Sullivan, what have you dragged in this time, Mrs. Henderson asked, but her tone was affectionate as she ushered them inside where it was marginally cooler. Found Miss Beatrice Calloway here about to fall off her horse outside my livery. Figured she could use a good meal and maybe a room for the night, Marcus explained. Mrs. Henderson's expression softened as she took in Beatrice's appearance. Oh, you poor dear. Come sit down right now before you collapse. Marcus, help her to the dining room while I get some food together. The dining room was empty at this hour, most people having already eaten their midday meal. Marcus guided Beatrice to a chair and then sat down across from her, removing his hat and setting it on the table. His hair was indeed lighter than she had first thought, sun-bleached at the ends, and she found herself staring at him perhaps longer than was strictly polite. So, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair with deceptive casualness, are you planning on staying in Kearney for a while or just passing through? It was the question she had been dreading because she honestly did not know the answer. Her original plan, if the desperate flight across Nebraska could be called a plan, had been to keep moving until she felt safe. But she was running out of money, and her horse needed rest, and if she were being completely honest with herself, she needed to stop running at some point. I do not know yet, she answered truthfully. It depends on several factors, such as whether whoever you are running from catches up to you, Marcus asked bluntly. Beatrice's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his. What makes you think I am running from someone? Miss Calloway, I was not born yesterday. You rode into town on a half-dead horse, looking like you have not slept properly in days. You are carrying your saddlebags like they contain the crown jewels, and you about jumped out of your skin when that wagon rattled past us on the street. Does not take a genius to figure out you are running from something or someone. She wanted to deny it, but the words would not come. Instead, she found her eyes filling with tears, and she angrily brushed them away with the back of her hand. It is complicated. Most worthwhile things are, Marcus replied, his voice gentler now. Look, I am not trying to pry into your business, but if you are in trouble, there are people in this town who might be able to help. Sheriff Morrison is a good man, fair and honest. No. The word came out sharper than she intended, and she saw Marcus's eyebrows rise. No sheriffs, no law, that would only make things worse. Marcus studied her for a long moment, and Beatrice had the uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing far more than she wanted him to. All right then. No law. But the offer stands if you change your mind. Mrs. Henderson arrived with plates of food that made Beatrice's mouth water instantly. There was beef stew thick with vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and apple pie that smelled like heaven. Beatrice could not remember the last time she had seen this much food, and she had to force herself to eat slowly rather than shovel it in like a starving animal. Marcus ate his own meal in comfortable silence, not pressuring her to talk or explain herself. It was surprisingly relaxing, and Beatrice felt some of the tension that had been coiled in her shoulders for days begin to ease slightly. "This is the best food I have eaten in months," she said finally, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "Mrs. Henderson is known for her cooking," Marcus agreed. "Half the unmarried men in town eat here regularly, hoping she will take pity on them and teach them her recipes." "Does she?" "Never. Says if she did, she would lose all her business." Marcus grinned, and Beatrice was struck by how the expression transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip a beat. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for some cowboy in a town where she probably could not stay. She had made enough mistakes involving men to last a lifetime. After they finished eating, Marcus insisted on paying for the meal despite Beatrice's protests. Mrs. Henderson showed her to a room on the second floor, small but clean, with a real bed that looked more comfortable than anything she had slept on in weeks. "Bath water will be up in about 30 minutes, Mrs. Henderson said kindly. "You take your time, dear. You look like you need it." "Room is yours for as long as you need it." "I can pay," Beatrice said quickly, not wanting charity. "I know you can, and we will settle accounts later. Right now you need to rest and clean up. Everything else can wait." After Mrs. Henderson left, Beatrice sank onto the bed and let out a long breath. She was in Kearney, Nebraska, a town she had never heard of until she saw the sign at its outskirts. She had about $200 left to her name, a tired horse, and the weight of secrets that could destroy her if they came to light. But she also had a full stomach, a comfortable place to sleep, and the memory of kind blue-gray eyes that had looked at her without judgment. It was more than she had dared hope for 3 days ago. The promised bath water arrived, and Beatrice spent a glorious hour soaking in the copper tub, scrubbing away layers of dust and fear. Her body was covered in bruises, some from the hard riding and some from before, reminders of why she had left. She traced her fingers over a particularly dark bruise on her ribs and felt the familiar mixture of anger and shame wash over her. Never again, she promised herself. She would die before she let anyone treat her that way again. After drying off and changing into her only other dress, a simple brown calico that had seen better days, Beatrice unpacked her saddlebags and carefully checked the contents. Everything was still there, including the leather journal filled with her uncle's business dealings and the small pouch of money she had taken from his safe. It was technically theft, but she considered it payment for years of unpaid labor and abuse. Her uncle, Bernard Calloway, had taken her in after her parents died of cholera when she was 16. She had been grateful at first, believing his promises that he would take care of her, put her through school, treat her like the daughter he never had. Instead, she had become little more than an unpaid servant in his household, cooking and cleaning while he ran his various business ventures of questionable legality. When she turned 21 and asked about the inheritance her father had left her, her uncle had laughed in her face and told her there was no inheritance, that her father had died penniless, and she should be grateful he had taken her in at all. She might have believed him if she had not accidentally discovered the truth while cleaning his office one day. Her father had left her a substantial sum, nearly $5,000, and her uncle had been systematically stealing it, forging her signature on documents and transferring the money into his own accounts. When she confronted him, he had struck her, the first time he had ever been physically violent with her. But it had not been the last. The final straw had come 2 weeks ago when he informed her that he had arranged a marriage for her to one of his business associates, a man named Fletcher who was at least 50 years old and had a reputation for cruelty toward women. When she refused, her uncle had locked her in her room and told her she would marry Fletcher whether she liked it or not. Beatrice had escaped through the window that night, taking what money she could find, her uncle's journal that detailed all his illegal activities as insurance, and leaving Philadelphia on the first train heading west. She had gotten off in Omaha and bought a horse, knowing that trains were too easy to trace, and had been riding ever since. She did not know if her uncle was looking for her, but she had to assume he was. The journal alone was enough to hang him if it fell into the right hands, and the money she had taken would infuriate him. Bernard Calloway was not a man who forgave or forgot. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts, and she quickly shoved the journal back into her saddlebag before answering. It was Mrs. Henderson with fresh towels and a concerned expression. "Just wanted to check that you had everything you needed, dear," the older woman said. "Yes, thank you. Everything is wonderful." Mrs. Henderson nodded but did not leave. "Marcus mentioned you might be looking to stay in town for a bit. Is that true?" Beatrice hesitated. "I might be. I have not decided yet." "Well, if you are looking for work, I could use some help around here. The girl I had helping me just got married and moved to her husband's farm. I need someone who can cook, clean, help with the guests. It does not pay a fortune, but it includes room and board, and it is honest work." The offer was so unexpected that Beatrice just stared at her for a moment. "You do not even know me. How do you know I can cook or clean or that I will not steal from you?" Mrs. Henderson smiled. "Marcus vouched for you, and that is good enough for me. That boy has excellent judgment of character, always has, and you have got honest eyes, even if they are hiding secrets." "We all have secrets, dear. The question is whether we are trying to do right going forward." "I am," Beatrice said earnestly. "I am trying to do right. My past is just complicated. Most people's pasts are, so what do you say? Want to give Kearney a chance?" Beatrice thought about her options. She could keep running, but she would eventually run out of money and end up in a worse situation. Or she could stay here, in this small town where a cowboy with kind eyes had helped her, and a boarding house owner was offering her a job without even knowing her story. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I would like that very much." "Wonderful. You can start tomorrow after you have had a good night's rest. For now, just sleep and recover from your journey." After Mrs. Henderson left, Beatrice lay down on the bed and closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could build a life here. Maybe she could finally stop running. She fell asleep thinking about blue-gray eyes and strong arms that had caught her when she fell. The next morning, Beatrice woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee wafting up from downstairs. She dressed quickly in her brown dress, braided her now clean hair, and made her way to the kitchen where Mrs. Henderson was already hard at work preparing breakfast for the boarding house guests. "Good morning, dear. Sleep well?" Mrs. Henderson asked cheerfully. "Better than I have in a long time," Beatrice admitted. "What can I do to help, Mrs. Henderson put her to work immediately, and Beatrice fell into the familiar rhythm of cooking and serving. There were 6 guests staying at the boarding house, all men passing through town on various business ventures. They were polite and thanked her for the food, though she caught more than one curious glance. After breakfast was cleaned up, Mrs. Henderson showed her the rest of her duties, which included laundry, changing linens, dusting, and helping prepare the other 2 meals. It was hard work, but Beatrice welcomed it. Hard work meant less time to think, less time to worry about whether her uncle was tracking her across the country. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the boarding house when she heard a familiar voice call out, "Morning, Miss Calloway." Beatrice turned to find Marcus leaning against the fence, his hat tipped back and a smile on his face. Her heart did an unexpected flutter, and she firmly told it to behave. "Good morning, Mr. Sullivan," she replied, pinning another sheet to the line. "Marcus, please." Mr. Sullivan is my father, and he has been dead for 5 years. All right, Marcus, and you can call me Beatrice. He nodded, his eyes taking in her appearance. She knew she looked better today, rested and clean, her dress modest but neat. I heard Mrs. Henderson hired you. That is good news. She has been needing help. I hope I can live up to her expectations. I have no doubt you will. Marcus paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. I was wondering if you might like to take a walk this evening after dinner. I could show you around town properly, introduce you to some folks, might help you settle in faster. Beatrice's first instinct was to refuse, to keep her distance and not get involved with anyone. But as she looked at Marcus standing there with his honest face and hopeful expression, she found herself wanting to say yes. What harm could a simple walk do? That would be nice, she said. Thank you. Marcus's smile broadened. Great, I will come by around 7 if that works for you. 7 is perfect. He tipped his hat to her and headed back toward his livery, and Beatrice found herself smiling as she returned to her laundry. Maybe making a friend here would not be such a bad thing. Maybe she could afford to let her guard down just a little bit. The rest of the day passed quickly, filled with work and learning Mrs. Henderson's routines. The older woman was patient and kind, never making Beatrice feel foolish for asking questions. By the time 7 o'clock rolled around, Beatrice had changed into her blue dress, now clean and mended where it had torn, and brushed out her hair so it fell in loose waves down her back. Marcus arrived promptly, looking freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. You look lovely, he said simply, and Beatrice felt that flutter in her heart again. Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself. They walked together through the town as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Marcus pointed out the various businesses and introduced her to people they passed. Everyone seemed to know and respect Marcus, and Beatrice noticed how his presence seemed to make people automatically accept her as well. How long have you lived in Kearney? She asked as they walked past the general store. All my life. I was born here in 1852, back when this was barely more than a trading post. Watched the town grow up around me. My father was one of the first ranchers in the area, and when he died, I inherited the land and the business. That must have been hard, losing him. It was. My mother passed when I was 12, and losing my father 5 years ago meant my sister Emma and I only had each other. She married a rancher from the next county over 2 years back, so now it is mostly just me. Do you ever get lonely? The question slipped out before Beatrice could stop it. Marcus looked at her thoughtfully. Sometimes. But I keep busy with the livery and the ranch, and I have got good friends in town. It is a good life, just maybe a bit quieter than I would like sometimes. They had reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The grass stretched out endlessly, rippling in the evening breeze like an ocean of gold. Beatrice had never seen anything quite like it, having grown up in the crowded streets of Philadelphia. It is beautiful, she breathed. It grows on you, Marcus agreed. Some people cannot stand the emptiness, but I find it peaceful. Makes you realize how small you are in the grand scheme of things. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun sink lower. Finally, Marcus said, "Can I ask you something? And you do not have to answer if you do not want to. All right. Are you planning on staying in Kearney long term, or is this just temporary until you feel safe moving on?" It was a fair question, and one Beatrice had been asking herself. Honestly, I do not know. I came here because I had to get away from my old life, but I do not know if I can ever really stop looking over my shoulder. Part of me thinks I should keep moving, but another part of me wants to try to build something here, to have a real life instead of just existing. What was your old life like? Marcus asked quietly. Beatrice considered how much to tell him. I grew up in Philadelphia. My parents died when I was 16 and I went to live with my uncle. He was not a good man, though I did not realize how bad things were until recently. When I found out he had been stealing from me and tried to force me into a marriage with a terrible man, I ran. I took what was rightfully mine and left, and I have been running ever since. It was not the whole truth, but it was close enough. She watched Marcus's face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. His expression hardened. He hurt you. It was not a question, and Beatrice realized he must have noticed the way she sometimes flinched at sudden movements or the fading bruises she had tried to cover. Yes, she said simply. But I got away and I am never going back. Good, Marcus said firmly. A man who would raise his hand to a woman is no man at all. You did the right thing leaving. The conviction in his voice made something warm bloom in Beatrice's chest. Thank you for saying that. And thank you for helping me yesterday. I do not know what I would have done if you had not been there. You would have figured something out. You are stronger than you think, Beatrice. Not many people would have the courage to leave everything behind and strike out on their own like you did. They began walking back toward town, their steps slow and unhurried. Beatrice found herself telling Marcus about her parents, the happy childhood she had before they died, her father's work as a bank clerk and her mother's beautiful singing voice. It felt good to remember the good times, to talk about them with someone who listened with genuine interest. Marcus, in turn, told her about growing up on the frontier, learning to rope and ride before he could properly read, helping his father build the ranch from nothing. He talked about his sister Emma with obvious affection, and Beatrice found herself wishing she had siblings, someone who shared her blood and her history. By the time they returned to the boarding house, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Marcus walked her to the door and stood there, turning his hat in his hands. I enjoyed this evening, he said. Would you like to do it again sometime? Maybe Sunday after church we could take a ride out to my ranch. I could show you the cattle, pack a picnic lunch. Beatrice knew she should say no, that getting close to anyone was dangerous when her past could catch up with her at any moment. But looking into Marcus's hopeful face, she could not bring herself to refuse. I would like that very much, she said softly. Marcus's face lit up. Great. I will pick you up around noon on Sunday then. He tipped his hat to her and walked away, and Beatrice watched him go with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She was playing with fire, she knew that. But maybe, just maybe, it would be worth getting burned. The next few days fell into a pleasant routine. Beatrice worked hard at the boarding house, proving herself capable and reliable. Mrs. Henderson seemed genuinely pleased with her work, and the guests complimented the meals she helped prepare. In the evenings, Marcus would stop by, and they would take short walks or sit on the porch and talk. Beatrice learned that Marcus was well-read despite his rough exterior, that he had taught himself by reading every book he could get his hands on. He had opinions on everything from politics to poetry, and he was not afraid to admit when he did not know something. She found his honesty refreshing after years of dealing with her uncle's manipulations. Marcus, for his part, seemed fascinated by her descriptions of city life, asking endless questions about Philadelphia, the buildings, the crowds, the theaters and museums. Beatrice found herself sharing stories she had not thought about in years, remembering the girl she had been before her parents died and her life fell apart. Sunday arrived with clear skies and perfect weather. Beatrice dressed in her blue riding dress, the one she had arrived in, now clean and mended. Marcus showed up right on time with 2 horses saddled and ready, including her own mare who looked well-rested and healthy. She looks good, Beatrice said, running her hand along the mare's neck. She is a fine animal. With proper rest and care, she has got many good years left in her. Have you named her? Beatrice realized she had not. "No, I bought her in Omaha and have just been calling her Horse." Marcus laughed. "Well, she deserves better than that. What about Midnight?" "She is black as midnight after all." "Midnight," Beatrice repeated, trying it out. "Yes, I like that. Midnight it is." They rode out of town together, and Beatrice marveled at how good it felt to be on horseback again without the crushing weight of fear driving her forward. The prairie spread out around them, and Marcus pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the area. His ranch was about 5 miles from town, a sprawling operation with a sturdy house, a large barn, corrals, and what looked like hundreds of cattle grazing on the grassland. "It is not much," Marcus said with obvious pride, "but it is mine." "It is wonderful," Beatrice said honestly. She could see the care and hard work that had gone into building this place, and she felt a pang of longing for something she had never had, a real home. Marcus showed her around, introducing her to his ranch hands, 2 brothers named Tom and Jack who had worked for his father and stayed on after Marcus took over. They were polite and friendly, and Beatrice could tell they respected their boss. They had lunch by a creek that ran through the property, sitting on a blanket Marcus had packed. Mrs. Henderson had prepared the food, fried chicken and biscuits and fresh berries, and they ate while watching the cattle graze peacefully in the distance. "You ever think about doing anything else?" Beatrice asked. "Besides ranching and running the livery," Marcus considered the question. "Sometimes I think about traveling, seeing some of the places I have read about. Boston, New York, San Francisco. But this land is in my blood, you know. I cannot imagine living anywhere else. This is home." "That must be nice," Beatrice said wistfully, "knowing where you belong." "You could belong here too," Marcus said, looking at her intently. "If you wanted to." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Beatrice knew what he was really saying, what he was offering. A place, a home, maybe even a future. It was tempting, so tempting she could barely breathe. "Marcus, there are things about my past, about why I left, that could put anyone close to me in danger. My uncle is not a good man, and if he finds me, he will not just let me go. He is involved in things, illegal things, and he has powerful friends. I do not want to bring trouble to you or to this town." Marcus reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and strong. "Beatrice, I am not afraid of trouble, and I am not afraid of your past. Whatever you are running from, whatever secrets you are keeping, they do not change the person you are right now. And the person you are right now is someone I want to get to know better." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "You should not say things like that. You do not know what you are getting into." "Then tell me everything, and let me decide if I am willing to take the risk." And so she did. Sitting by that creek on a perfect Sunday afternoon, Beatrice told Marcus everything. About her uncle's criminal activities, the money laundering and extortion detailed in the journal she had stolen. About the inheritance he had embezzled, the beatings when she confronted him, the forced marriage he had tried to arrange. About Fletcher and his reputation for violence against women. About her escape, and the very real possibility that her uncle was hunting her across state lines. Marcus listened without interrupting, his hand never leaving hers. When she finished, her throat was raw and her eyes were wet with tears she had been holding back for weeks. "Thank you for telling me," Marcus said finally. "That took courage, and I know it was not easy." "You should probably stay away from me now," Beatrice said, trying to pull her hand away. "I am nothing but trouble." Marcus held on tighter. "Beatrice, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his. "You are not trouble. You are a brave woman who escaped a terrible situation and is trying to build a new life. And that journal you have, those records of your uncle's crimes, they could be valuable evidence. There is a U.S. Marshal who comes through Kearney every few months, a man named Harrison who is honest as the day is long. We could talk to him, see if there is a way to use what you know to put your uncle behind bars where he belongs. And if that makes things worse, if it brings him here looking for revenge, then we deal with it together. You are not alone anymore, Beatrice. I am here, and I am not going anywhere." The conviction in his voice broke something open inside her, and she found herself crying in earnest, years of fear and loneliness pouring out. Marcus pulled her into his arms and held her while she sobbed, his hand rubbing soothing circles on her back, murmuring words of comfort. When she finally calmed down, Beatrice pulled back and wiped her eyes. "I am sorry. I did not mean to fall apart like that. You have nothing to apologize for. You have been carrying this alone for too long." They sat together for a while longer, not talking, just being present with each other. Beatrice felt lighter somehow, as if sharing her burden had actually made it smaller. When they finally rode back to town, she felt something she had not experienced in years: peace. Over the next few weeks, Beatrice settled into her new life in Kearney. She worked at the boarding house and spent her evenings with Marcus. They took walks, went on picnics, and talked about everything and nothing. The other townspeople began to accept her as one of their own, and she made friends with the woman who ran the general store and the doctor's wife. Marcus was true to his word about not pressuring her, but Beatrice could feel the growing attraction between them, the way their hands would brush and linger, the way his eyes would follow her when he thought she was not looking. She felt it too, that pull toward him, stronger each day. One evening in late August, they were sitting on the porch of the boarding house watching the sunset when Marcus said, "Marshal Harrison is coming to town tomorrow. I think we should talk to him about your uncle." Beatrice tensed. "I do not know if I am ready for that. I understand. But Beatrice, as long as your uncle is free and looking for you, you will never really be safe. If we can stop him, if we can use what you know to bring him to justice, you would be free. Really free, not just hiding." She knew he was right, but the thought of confronting her past head-on was terrifying. What if something goes wrong? What if he comes here? Then we will be ready for him. Sheriff Morrison is a good man, and with the marshal involved, we will have the law on our side, and you have got me. I will not let anything happen to you." Beatrice looked at Marcus, at his strong profile and determined expression. She realized that somewhere along the way, she had started to trust him completely. More than that, she had started to love him, though she had not let herself fully acknowledge it until this moment. "All right," she said quietly. "We will talk to the marshal." Marcus turned to look at her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "You are the bravest person I know," he said softly. Then, slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, his lips warm against hers. Beatrice felt something bloom inside her chest, bright and hopeful and terrifying. She kissed him back, pouring all her complicated feelings into that single moment. When they pulled apart, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Beatrice Calloway. I know it is fast, and I know the timing is terrible, but I needed you to know." "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered back, "and it scares me to death. We will figure it out together. I promise." The next day they met with Marshal Harrison, a gruff man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and a reputation for fairness. Beatrice showed him the journal and told him everything she knew about her uncle's operations. The marshal listened carefully, asking pointed questions and taking notes. "This is good evidence," Harrison said finally. "Very good. Bernard Calloway has been on our radar for a while, but we have never been able to get enough concrete proof to move against him. With this journal and your testimony, we could build a solid case." "What would happen to me?" Beatrice asked. "Would I have to go back to Philadelphia?" "Eventually, yes. We would need you to testify at trial. but I can arrange for protection, make sure you are safe, and it would not be right away. These things take time to build, investigations to conduct, could be months before we are ready to make arrests. And in the meantime, you stay here where you are safe. Keep a low profile, and if you see anyone suspicious or asking questions about you, you report it immediately to Sheriff Morrison or to me." They agreed to the marshal's terms, and he took the journal with him, promising to keep her informed of any developments. Beatrice felt both relieved and anxious as they left the sheriff's office. She had set something in motion that could not be undone. "You did the right thing," Marcus said, taking her hand as they walked back toward the boarding house. "I hope so." Life continued its pattern over the next several weeks. Beatrice worked and made friends and continued to fall deeper in love with Marcus. They were careful not to be too public with their affection, mindful of propriety and the town's perception, but everyone could see the way they looked at each other. Mrs. Henderson teased Beatrice gently about Marcus's constant presence. "That boy is smitten with you, and do not think I have not noticed you are equally smitten with him." Beatrice felt her cheeks heat. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to anyone with eyes, dear. And before you start worrying about impropriety, you should know that this town has been hoping Marcus would find someone for years. He is one of the good ones, and people can see that you are good for him." "I care about him very much," Beatrice admitted. "But I worry that my troubles will affect him." "Life is full of troubles, dear. What matters is having someone to face them with. Do not push that man away because you are scared. Scared is no way to live." The words stayed with Beatrice, and she found herself opening up more to Marcus, letting him further into her heart. They talked about the future tentatively, the life they might build together if her uncle was arrested and she was finally free. In early October, a letter arrived from Marshal Harrison. Her uncle had been arrested in Philadelphia along with several of his associates. The evidence from the journal, combined with additional investigation, had been sufficient for federal charges. Bernard Calloway was facing prison time, and his lawyer had already indicated he would likely plead guilty to avoid a trial. "It is over," Beatrice said, staring at the letter in disbelief. "He is actually in custody. I am free." Marcus picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing with relief and joy. When he set her down, he grew serious. "Beatrice Calloway, now that you are free and safe, I have something to ask you." He got down on one knee right there in the middle of Mrs. Henderson's parlor, and Beatrice's heart started racing. "I know we have not known each other that long, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You have brought light and laughter and love into my world, and I want to spend the rest of my days making you happy. Will you marry me?" Beatrice felt tears streaming down her face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." Marcus stood and kissed her thoroughly, and she heard Mrs. Henderson sniffling happily in the doorway. "About time you two made it official," the older woman said. "I will start planning the wedding immediately." They were married in November on a beautiful crisp autumn day. Emma, Marcus's sister, came with her husband and helped Beatrice prepare. The ceremony was held in the small church in Kearney with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Beatrice wore a new dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her make, a beautiful cream-colored silk that made her feel like a princess. When she walked down the aisle and saw Marcus waiting for her at the altar, his face full of love and promise, Beatrice felt her heart might burst with happiness. This man had given her everything: safety, love, a home, and a future she had never dared to imagine. They said their vows in strong, clear voices, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed her with such tender passion that people in the front row had to look away with embarrassed smiles. The reception was held at the boarding house, with food and dancing and laughter. Beatrice met more of Marcus's friends and relatives, all of whom welcomed her warmly into the community. She felt blessed beyond measure, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought her to this small Nebraska town. That night, Marcus carried her over the threshold of the house on his ranch, which was now her home too. They made love for the first time with tenderness and care, Marcus making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. Beatrice had worried that the violence she had experienced would make intimacy difficult, but with Marcus, it felt natural and right and beautiful. Afterward, they lay tangled together in bed, and Marcus traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happy, Mrs. Sullivan." "Happier than I have ever been," Beatrice said honestly. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is real, that I get to have this life with you. It is real, and it is just the beginning. We are going to build an amazing life together, you and me." And they did. The first few years of marriage were filled with hard work and laughter and love. Beatrice learned ranching, becoming as capable on horseback as Marcus. She expanded the vegetable garden, started raising chickens, and became known throughout the county for her cooking. Marcus's ranch prospered, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the area. They faced challenges, of course. There were harsh winters and drought years, cattle disease and market fluctuations. But they faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. In the summer of 1880, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She was 24 years old and had never been more excited or terrified. Marcus was over the moon, treating her like she was made of glass, until she finally had to tell him to stop fussing. Their first child, a son they named Matthew after Marcus's father, was born in February of 1881 during a howling snowstorm. Beatrice labored for 12 hours with Mrs. Henderson and the town doctor in attendance while Marcus paced holes in the floor downstairs. When the doctor finally came down holding a squalling baby boy, Marcus burst into tears. "You have a son," the doctor said with a smile, "and your wife is doing well. She is asking for you." Marcus bounded up the stairs and found Beatrice propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding their son. "Look what we made," she said softly. Marcus kissed her forehead and then looked down at the tiny wrinkled face of his son. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much." Motherhood suited Beatrice. She took to it naturally, caring for Matthew with a fierce protective love that amazed Marcus. She would sit for hours rocking the baby, singing the songs her own mother had sung to her, and Marcus would watch them with his heart in his eyes. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Catherine after Beatrice's mother. She was a colicky baby who cried for months, testing their patience and their sleep, but they weathered it together with humor and love. Emma visited often, bringing her own 3 children, and the house was filled with the noise and chaos of family. In 1885, Marshal Harrison stopped by the ranch during one of his circuits through the area. Beatrice invited him for dinner, and over roast beef and potatoes, he told them that Bernard Calloway had died in prison the previous year. "I thought you should know," Harrison said. "He is gone, and he can never hurt you again." Beatrice felt a complicated mix of emotions at the news. She had hated her uncle for what he had done to her, but he had also been her last connection to her parents. Marcus took her hand under the table, understanding without words what she was feeling. After the marshal left, Beatrice stood on the porch looking out over the ranch, their land, their home. Marcus came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I am," she said, leaning back against him. "I am just thinking about how different my life turned out from what I expected. If someone had told that terrified girl who rode into Kearney 7 years ago that she would end up here, married to an amazing man with 2 beautiful children and a real home. I never would have believed them. Best decision I ever made was helping you that day, Marcus said, kissing her neck. You changed my life completely. You saved mine, Beatrice corrected. You gave me everything I never even knew I wanted. They stood there together as the sun set over their land. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Over the years, their family continued to grow. They had another son, James, in 1887, and a final daughter, Ellen, in 1890. The house Marcus had built expanded to accommodate their growing family, and the ranch continued to thrive. Marcus and Beatrice worked side by side, true partners in every sense. They taught their children to ride and rope, to work hard and treat people fairly. They hosted gatherings where neighbors would come from miles around to share food and music and stories. Beatrice never forgot where she came from or how close she had come to a completely different fate. She made it her mission to help other women who found themselves in difficult situations, working with Mrs. Henderson to establish a kind of informal safe house for women fleeing abuse or hardship. She could not save everyone, but she saved some, and that mattered. Marcus supported her fully, proud of her compassion and determination. He watched her blossom over the years from a frightened refugee into a confident woman who knew her own mind and was not afraid to speak it. She served on the church committee, helped establish the first school in Kearney, and became a voice for justice in their community. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, Marcus surprised Beatrice with a trip to Philadelphia. She had not been back since she fled, and the thought of returning filled her with trepidation. I thought maybe you would want to visit your parents' graves, Marcus said gently, and maybe find some closure with that part of your life. They left their children with Emma and took the train east. Beatrice was amazed by how much the country had changed in 2 decades, how much faster and more connected everything had become. When they arrived in Philadelphia, she barely recognized the city of her childhood. Marcus hired a carriage to take them to the cemetery where her parents were buried. Beatrice stood before their shared headstone and told them about her life, her husband, her children. She cried, but they were healing tears, a final release of the grief she had carried for so long. I wish you could have met Marcus, she said softly. I think you would have loved him. Marcus stood quietly beside her, his hand in hers, giving her the space to grieve and remember. They also visited the courthouse where her uncle had been tried. The records showed he had died of pneumonia in 1884, unrepentant to the end. Beatrice felt nothing but pity for the bitter man who had squandered so much for greed. When they returned to Kearney, Beatrice felt lighter somehow, as if visiting her past had finally allowed her to fully embrace her future. She threw herself into her life with renewed energy, appreciating every moment with Marcus and their children. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and celebrations. Matthew grew into a fine young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. He married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch in 1902, and Beatrice became a grandmother to twin boys the following year. Catherine pursued teaching, establishing herself as an excellent educator and marrying the town doctor in 1904. James took after his father in temperament and skill, becoming Marcus's right hand on the ranch. Ellen, their youngest, was artistic and dreamy, eventually moving to Denver to pursue painting, though she visited home often. Through it all, Marcus and Beatrice's love never wavered. They still took walks in the evening when weather permitted, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. They had disagreements sometimes, of course, but they always worked through them with respect and communication. In 1910, as they prepared to celebrate their 31st anniversary, Beatrice looked at Marcus across the dinner table and marveled at how handsome he still was, even with silver threading through his wheat-colored hair. He caught her staring and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am. How grateful I am that I rode into Kearney that day and found you." Marcus reached across the table to take her hand. "The luck was all mine, Beatrice. You have made every day of the last 31 years better just by being in it. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "How did I get so lucky to find you?" Beatrice asked, tears gathering in her eyes. "We found each other," Marcus corrected gently, "and we built this beautiful life together. Neither of us could have done it alone." That night, lying in bed with Marcus's arms around her, Beatrice thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had fled Philadelphia in terror, convinced that her life was over, that she had nothing to look forward to but fear and loneliness. Instead, she had found love and family and a home that filled her heart to bursting. She thought about that frightened 22-year-old girl who had ridden into town on a half-dead horse, and she wished she could go back and tell her that everything would be all right, that happiness was waiting for her in the form of a kind cowboy with blue-gray eyes. But she could not go back, and that was fine. She had the future instead, a future filled with grandchildren and laughter and love. She had Marcus, her rock and her partner and her best friend. She had a family who adored her and a community that respected her. The years continued to be kind to them. They watched their children build their own families, celebrated the births of more grandchildren, and took pride in the legacy they had created together. The ranch remained prosperous, and they were able to help their children establish their own homes and businesses. In 1915, Marcus turned 63 and finally agreed to hand over the day-to-day operations of the ranch to Matthew and James, though he still worked every day because he could not imagine doing anything else. Beatrice, at 59, had slowed down a bit, but was still active in the community and devoted to her growing brood of grandchildren. They built a smaller house on the property, leaving the main ranch house to Matthew and his growing family, but they were never far away. Family dinners happened every Sunday, with children and grandchildren filling the house with noise and love. One evening in spring, sitting on the porch of their new house watching the sunset, Marcus turned to Beatrice and said, "I have had a good life." Beatrice looked at him sharply. "Why does that sound like you are saying goodbye?" "I am not going anywhere," Marcus assured her. "I am just appreciating what we have built. Sometimes I look at our family, all these people who exist because we found each other, and it takes my breath away." "We did make something special, did not we?" Beatrice said softly. "We did. And I want you to know that if I could go back and live my life over, I would not change a single thing. Every choice, every challenge, every moment led me to you and to this. That makes it all worthwhile." Beatrice felt tears streaming down her face. "I love you, Marcus Sullivan. You gave me the future I never imagined when I rode into town that day, half dead and terrified. You showed me what love really means, what family means. You gave me everything." Marcus pulled her close, and they sat together as the sky turned from blue to orange to purple, content in the life they had built and the love they shared. In the summer of 1920, they celebrated their 41st anniversary with a huge party that brought together their children, grandchildren, and what felt like half the county. There was food and music and dancing, and Beatrice found herself pulled into a waltz with Marcus, just like they had danced at their wedding so many years ago. "Still got some moves, old man," she teased as he spun her. "Still got the prettiest girl in Nebraska," he replied with a wink. Matthew stood up to give a toast, surrounded by his siblings and their families. I want to thank my parents for showing us what real love looks like. They have built not just a successful ranch, but a family that loves and supports each other. They have taught us to work hard, treat people fairly, and never give up on the people we love. Here is to many more years together." Everyone raised their glasses, and Beatrice looked around at all the faces, young and old, that had come from her union with Marcus. She counted 18 grandchildren at last count, with more surely on the way. Every single one of them bore the legacy of that day 42 years ago when she had ridden into Kearney, desperate and afraid. That night, exhausted but happy, Beatrice lay in bed with Marcus and said, "That was a perfect day." "Every day with you is perfect," Marcus replied, pulling her close. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, just as they had every night for over 4 decades. The years that followed were gentle ones. Marcus and Beatrice watched their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own. They took pleasure in simple things: morning coffee together, evening walks, Sunday dinners with the family. Their bodies aged, joints growing stiffer and steps growing slower, but their love remained as strong as ever. In 1925, on a warm October afternoon, Marcus had a heart attack while working in the barn. James found him and rushed him to the house, and Beatrice held his hand while the doctor was summoned. Marcus looked at her with clear eyes and said, "I am not afraid. I have lived a full life with the woman I love." "Do not you dare leave me, Marcus Sullivan," Beatrice said fiercely. "We still have more years together." Marcus squeezed her hand. "As many as we get. But Beatrice, if this is it, I need you to know that loving you has been the greatest joy of my life. You made every day worth living." But it was not his time yet. Marcus recovered from the heart attack, though the doctor warned that he needed to take it easier. Marcus grumbled about it but agreed, finally accepting that at 73 years old, he was not as young as he used to be. For the next 3 years, they treasured every day together. They took more time to sit and talk, to reminisce about their life together. Beatrice wrote down their story, wanting their grandchildren and great-grandchildren to know how they had found each other, how love had transformed both their lives. In the spring of 1928, Marcus passed away peacefully in his sleep, Beatrice beside him as she had been for 49 years. The entire town turned out for his funeral, testament to the respect and affection people had for him. Matthew, James, Catherine, and Ellen all spoke, sharing memories of their father and the lessons he had taught them. Beatrice stood at the graveside and placed a single rose on his casket. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." Grief was hard, but Beatrice found comfort in her family. Her children insisted she live with them, rotating between houses so she was never alone. She spent her days with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, about the early days of Kearney, about a time when the West was still wild. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and remember. She remembered that first day when she rode into town, exhausted and terrified. She remembered Marcus catching her as she fell, his strong arms and kind eyes. She remembered their first walk, their first kiss, the day he proposed. She remembered building their home together, raising their children, facing challenges side by side. Most of all, she remembered the love. The deep, abiding, transformative love that had taken a broken, frightened girl and given her the strength to become the woman she was meant to be. Beatrice lived to be 92 years old, passing away peacefully in 1933 surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She was buried next to Marcus, and on her headstone, Matthew had engraved, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother." She rode into town seeking safety and found love instead. The story of Marcus and Beatrice Sullivan became part of Kearney's history, told and retold to new generations. It was a story about courage and second chances, about the power of love to heal and transform. It was about finding home in unexpected places and building a future from the ashes of the past. Their ranch remained in the family for decades after their deaths, run by their children and grandchildren who carried on the values Marcus and Beatrice had instilled in them: hard work, honesty, compassion, and love. The house where they had raised their family became a gathering place for family reunions, a physical reminder of the legacy they had built. In the early 1950s, one of their great-granddaughters, studying to be a writer, found the manuscript Beatrice had written about her life with Marcus. She was captivated by the story of these two people who had lived and loved so fully. She worked to preserve family records, conducting interviews with the oldest members of the family who still remembered Marcus and Beatrice. What emerged was a portrait of a remarkable couple who had defied the odds. Beatrice, who had fled Philadelphia with nothing but fear and determination, had become a pillar of her community, a woman of strength and compassion. Marcus, who could have married any number of local girls, had recognized something special in the desperate woman who rode into his town and had committed his life to making her happy. Their story became a reminder that sometimes our darkest moments lead us to our greatest joys. That the courage to run toward an uncertain future can be rewarded beyond our wildest dreams. That love, when it is true and deep and mutual, can overcome any obstacle. The Sullivan family grew and spread across the country over the decades, but they always came back to Kearney for reunions. They would visit the ranch, walk the land their ancestors had worked, and stand at the graves of Marcus and Beatrice. They would tell their children about the woman who rode into town fleeing her past, and the cowboy who gave her a future she never imagined. Because that is what love does. It transforms us. It gives us courage we did not know we had. It shows us that home is not a place but a person, that family is not just blood but choice, that the future is not predetermined but created by the choices we make and the people we choose to make them with. Marcus and Beatrice Sullivan chose each other, and in doing so, they created a legacy that would endure for generations. They proved that sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them, when we are broken and vulnerable and certain that happiness is impossible. They proved that love, real love, is worth fighting for, worth building a life around, worth everything. And in a small town in Nebraska, in a cemetery where the prairie grass grows tall and the wind whispers through the trees, two headstones stand side by side, bearing witness to a love story that began with a desperate woman on a tired horse and a cowboy with kind eyes who decided to help. It was a simple story in many ways, but it was also extraordinary. It was the story of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment, who built a life of purpose and meaning together, who loved each other with everything they had until their very last breaths. And that, in the end, is what makes it a story worth remembering. Not because it was unusual or dramatic, but because it was real. Because it showed what is possible when two people commit to each other, to building something lasting, to facing whatever comes together. The town of Kearney, Nebraska changed over the decades and centuries, growing from a frontier settlement into a modern city. But the story of Marcus and Beatrice Sullivan remained, passed down through generations, a reminder of the town's history and the people who built it. Their descendants continued to honor their memory, establishing a scholarship in their names for young people pursuing agriculture or education, the two fields that had meant so much to them. The original ranch house was preserved as a historical site, allowing visitors to see how frontier families lived and worked. But more than any physical legacy, Marcus and Beatrice left behind the intangible gift of their example. They showed that it is possible to overcome a difficult past, to build happiness from heartbreak, to create family from nothing. They demonstrated that love is not always easy, but it is always worth it. They proved that sometimes the person who saves us is not the one we expected, that help can come from the most unlikely sources. Most importantly, they showed that our pasts do not have to define our futures. Beatrice could have let her uncle's cruelty and betrayal make her bitter and closed off. Marcus could have played it safe and avoided the complications of loving a woman with a dangerous past. Instead, they chose courage. They chose hope. They chose each other. And in doing so, they created something beautiful and lasting. A love that transcended time and circumstance. A family that would carry their values forward for generations. On summer evenings in Kearney, when the sun sets over the prairie in brilliant shades of gold and orange, it is not hard to imagine a young woman on a black horse riding toward an uncertain future, or a tall cowboy with kind eyes stepping out of a livery stable to help a stranger in need. It is not hard to imagine the first stirrings of what would become a legendary love, the beginning of a story that would inspire countless others, because that is what the best love stories do. They inspire us. They give us hope. They show us what is possible when we are brave enough to open our hearts, when we are willing to trust again after being hurt, when we believe that tomorrow can be better than today. Marcus and Beatrice Sullivan believed in tomorrow. They believed in each other. And they built a beautiful life on that foundation of faith and love. Their story, which began with fear and flight, ended with joy and fulfillment. The woman who rode into town fleeing her past found not just safety, but purpose, family, and a love that would sustain her through 5 decades of marriage and beyond. The cowboy who helped her discovered that kindness to a stranger could lead to the greatest happiness he would ever know. Together, they proved that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a much better one. That sometimes we have to lose everything to find what really matters. That sometimes, just sometimes, happily ever after is not just a fairy tale ending but a life lived fully, with purpose and love and gratitude for every single day. And that is a legacy worth celebrating, a story worth remembering, a love worth honoring for generations to come. In the end, Marcus and Beatrice Sullivan did exactly what they set out to do. They built a life together. They raised good, strong children who went on to build their own lives and families. They contributed to their community and left it better than they found it. They loved each other with devotion and constancy through good times and bad. They took a chance on each other when neither had any guarantee of how things would turn out, and they made it work through commitment, communication, and genuine care for each other's happiness. They created a partnership that was truly equal, where both people contributed and both people benefited, where love was not about possession or control but about mutual support and respect. That is why their story endures. That is why, more than a century after Beatrice rode into Kearney, people still tell tales about the cowboy and his bride, about the ranch they built and the family they raised, about the love that sustained them through everything life threw their way. It is a story that reminds us all that it is never too late for a new beginning, that love can find us even in our darkest moments, that kindness to strangers can change lives in ways we never imagine. Marcus gave Beatrice the future she never imagined, but she gave him something equally precious. She gave him purpose, partnership, and a love that made every day meaningful. They saved each other in the end and built something that would outlast them both. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, they are together still, the cowboy and his bride, dancing in the sunset like they did at their wedding so many years ago, proving once and for all that true love really does last forever. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren carry their names, their values, and their legacy forward into a new century. A living testament to what two people can build when they choose love over fear, hope over despair, together over alone. The Sullivan Ranch still stands on the Nebraska prairie, and on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right, it is almost possible to hear echoes of laughter from a house full of family, or to see two figures walking hand in hand across the land they loved, together in death as they were in life. It is a fitting end to a story that began with a woman fleeing her past and a cowboy willing to help. A story that proved that sometimes our greatest adventures begin when we are simply trying to survive, and that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places. Marcus and Beatrice Sullivan lived, loved, and left a legacy that continues to inspire. Their story is one of courage, second chances, and the transformative power of love. It is a reminder that we are all capable of creating our own happily ever after, if we are brave enough to take that first step into an unknown future, and wise enough to recognize and hold on to love when we find it. And so their story ends where all the best stories end, with love triumphant, family established, and two souls who found each other against all odds, proving that sometimes, just sometimes, the most beautiful futures grow from the most difficult pasts. The end.